Hey everyone, welcome to our first speaker event this year, brought to you by the AHS Engineering and Technology Club. Speaking with us today is Iman Ghanizada, the Global Cybersecurity Executive at Google, who is featured on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Mr. Ghanizada, would you like to tell us a bit more about your background in research?
Yeah, of course. Again, really excited to be here, really excited to see everyone, chat with everyone, and please keep this as informal as possible. We'll talk through some questions, but if at any point in time anything pops into mind, feel free to pop them in the chat. So what do I do? It's a really complicated, really complicated question. What I do is the easy answer is I work with companies to help them protect themselves against the bad guys. So earlier in my career, I used to help companies, like as an engineer and as an employee of the security team, protect themselves. Now I work at Google Cloud, where I work with clients all over the world, and I help advise them on how they can basically build better security defenses to protect themselves against attackers. It seems like a lot of nowadays. I'm sure everyone's heard the news. There's a new hack on the news just about every day of the week, and it's so funny because most of the hackers are like 17 or 18 years old. And we've got a whole multi billion dollar industry built around making sure that companies can protect themselves. And that's thanks to the complexities of technology. I mean, we every single company in the world, you name it, from healthcare to financial services to internet companies, every single company is building technology, building products, building services uh, in the digital age. And so it gets so complex when you've got 5, 10, 5,000, 50,000 employees and hundreds of thousands of servers all over the world, and you have to protect all of them against one single person. So that's a little bit about what I do. And aside from the day job, I also spend a bit of time, supporting the community where I can. I mentor folks, where I can. I also work with a nonprofit coalition, Afghan Refugee Relief, where we're spending a lot of time in the community helping the latest Afghan refugee crisis, helping get all the refugees resettled, primarily in Southern California, and always finding opportunities just to give back where I can. So it's just a little 30-second overview of me.
Hi, Mr. Ghanizada. Thank you so much about that valuable insight and that general information about your background. So, for our first question, what inspired you to get involved in the field of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so it's a funny question because I want to think back to when I was in high school. And Lydia, what grade are you in right now?
I'm in 10th.
You're in 10th.
Yeah.
Okay, Karthik, what about you and Shaunak?
The same. I'm in 10th too.
10th
I'm in ninth.
and 9th. Okay. So for most ninth, 10th graders, it's you're at a point where you're like, okay, I'm starting to think about college, where I want to go to college, what I want to start to learn, what I want to, practice, and where I want to sort of what careers I may be interested in. But a lot of folks are generally just a little confused, and it's totally okay. It's totally okay to not have a clue of what you want to do, because the whole point of college is to get you exposed to different types of practices, so you can find, an area that you really like and really enjoy. Um, my experience in cybersecurity has been the total opposite. When I was maybe, I would say, when I was about 5 years old. So back then, you got to understand, like, in the early 90s, the internet was pretty much, it wasn't even available until I think like 96 commercially to people. So this was like pre-internet, pre-digital age, pre-iPhones. And I have two older brothers and one younger sister. And my oldest brothers, they were always interested in breaking stuff. And so one of them had learned how to basically hack into a payphone. And payphones, I'm sure y'all have read about payphones. Payphones are phones that, you put coins in, you can make phone calls. And I don't even remember if they had area codes back then. But anyways, out of sheer curiosity and being a curious 9 or 10-year-old, he built this device to basically put it on a payphone, and the payphone listened to the sound of a coin drop. And every time it heard a quarter drop, not a nickel, not a dime, but every time it heard the sound of a quarter drop, it would allow you to make a phone call. And so he put this device on the phone, and then, basically we triggered phone calls, and then we just prank call random numbers. So ever since we were kids, we were always interested in finding ways to, I wouldn't say to break things, but to find ways around, around problems. And when the internet came out, we grew up in an Afghan family. We didn't have too much, so we were using Net Zero for free. We were using some of the early days of the internet, and we were just finding our way around the internet. And it's kind of all started back then. I learned through them. From that point, I guess it naturally transitioned into me always knowing that I'm interested in technology. And as I went through school, as I went through college, I've kind of always known that I've been very interested in this space, and here we are, 30 years later.
Okay, so it's cool how you really got into that kind of general field of cybersecurity by tinkering with things. So when it comes to the technical aspects, how did you learn the required skills needed for cybersecurity?
Yeah, so in any field like cybersecurity or not, right? Like generally speaking, I think if you're in any field in the world, the biggest thing about being in tech or being in healthcare or being in financial services or just having a career that you're passionate about is just being curious. Like I really think curiosity is probably one of like the greatest skills that you don't think is a skill, right? But when you start to get a little older, you start to realize, I'm actually curious about a lot of things. That level of curiosity drags you down rabbit holes. And so like a lot of the technical skills that you develop, the easy answer is going to say, go online and go study these boot camps and take these certifications, do all these X, Y, and Z things. But really, it comes down to curiosity. And if you're curious enough to solve a problem or understand how something works, I would say the formula is curiosity times Googling times YouTubing. If you can master all three of them, then you'll find yourself deep in a learning journey, and you naturally will find the skills needed to solve, the problems in whatever career you decide to take on, whether that's software engineering, cybersecurity, being an incredible researcher, you name it.
It's interesting how you say that curiosity kind of makes up the core of your job as a cybersecurity engineer. So, as a follow-up question to that, what times has curiosity really helped you in your career?
That's a great question. So here's the thing about the workforce. All right. So when you're in high school, like I'm trying to think back to when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I was taking, English, Spanish, which I was terrible at. I only know 2 words, and that's un poco, and that means a little. You take all these different courses. You take woodworking, whatever you name it. You get exposed to a lot of different things, right? And repeat your question again. It was about cybersecurity engineering. I want to correlate these two together.
Yeah, so I asked, what moments has curiosity helped you in your cybersecurity journey?
Okay, so in school, your curiosity is going to drive you to find the answers to a lot of the challenges that you have, the exams you have, right? Every quarter you have a new set of exams, and you kind of have to be curious enough to want to learn a little bit more Spanish to do good at Spanish, right? You got to be curious enough to want to, learn a little bit more about math and, geometry or whatever you're studying and derivatives, right? To really do well on your exams. In the workforce, it's kind of similar. Like you can just be, just a average student, right? You can just, be doing the job and, be an engineer that comes and you get hired to do the work, and you do the work and you do it great. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I would say there's like a distribution of people in the workforce. There's a small percent that struggles, that needs coaching and advice. There's a good percent that's like does what they're intended to do, and that's it. And then there is the percent that is really, really, really curious and starts to find problems and figure out how to solve those problems in their companies. And then there's like the leaders and the executives that also use all those skills that they've developed to also know how to navigate and inspire and collaborate across with people across the organization. That's kind of like mentally the breakout of like how this skill really works out in the workforce. But in my day job, right, so some of the work I do today, right now, to give you an example, and I'm trying to figure out the easiest way to explain this, one of the problems I was curious to solve, which I started thinking about probably February of 2021, was this problem that today, if you look at, if you look at the news, right, again, I mentioned this earlier, everyone is getting hacked, right? Every company is getting hacked. And today that's for companies, if they lose data, like, it's not the end of the world for a lot of companies. But if you look at where we're going in the world, we've got companies that are starting to build really critical technologies that our lives depend on, right? Like, can you just imagine if like the back-end banking system went down for stock traders and their whole system went down and they couldn't trade stocks? That would be really bad for people. Or if people at a hospital are using devices to monitor patients and that whole entire set of devices went out. Like, now more and more companies are trusting technology to be leveraged for these things that maybe uphold lives and protect lives. And they're finding new ways to create new products using technology. And so it's more important now than ever for companies to figure out how they can protect themselves. Companies are one part. The other part of it is like governments. So for example, the US national government, right? They're in charge of protecting our borders, protecting our security. And for them, we're also reaching a time where traditional warfare is no longer about guns and everything else. People are starting to use bots and drive big, large campaigns to influence how people think, to drive rifts in populations, right? Like, these things are starting to happen. And different countries are using technology to take advantage of American citizens. So it's really important. The reason I bring all this up is because the way that we're headed in a technology space, if you see the problems we're going to be going through over the next several years, we need more and more cybersecurity people in the field. And we also need to find better ways to protect companies like Uber from getting hacked again, and protect any other companies from getting hacked again. Because today, maybe Uber is a driving platform. Tomorrow, maybe it's something that really provides critical infrastructure for all Americans, right? Or for people in various different countries. So that was the sort of long-winded half part of the answer. But the second part of it is, what's the exact problem I'm solving? The big problem I'm trying to solve for, one of it is there's a big gap in security talent in the workforce. There's 700,000 jobs in America that are unfilled. So if every one of you were like, I'm going to go do cybersecurity tomorrow, I promise all of you would have jobs, like no problem. And also in software engineering. So there's a big shortage in talent. The way that people do security today is very, how do I describe this? Let's think about like robotic process automation. Like, I know there's a lot of folks in the robotics team here, right? So robotics are designed to help build automations to help do things and solve problems and automate them, right? Security is the opposite. It needs a lot of people to solve problems. I'm trying to bridge the gap between people solving problems and help people use more robots and more automation so that they can solve problems at a much larger scale versus being able to solve one thing at a time. And if we can do that really well, then maybe there won't be 700,000 unfilled jobs. Maybe we can shrink that gap and help people also have better, more interesting jobs in the space.
It makes sense to sort of bridge that gap between problem solving for both robots and people. So in general, we know that you have an extensive career. So what is the most important lesson you've learned throughout your experiences helping many large companies like Google strengthen their cybersecurity measures?
So I want to sort of take this away from the cybersecurity and apply it more to like what we can do, just thinking about your careers going forward, because you're also like you all here are in some of the most you're in one of the most interesting ages of society. Okay, think about this for a second. Okay, in right now we put on our calendars, we write it's the year 2022 and yada yada yada, and the reality is like humans have had, you know, what, 2.8 millions of years of evolution. Okay, and in the year 1996, when the internet went commercial, or maybe even a little before that, when technology started to become mainstream, internet technology, this was the first time in society that people were born into a world where their identities are digital. Think about that for a second. So like I was born in 92, and the internet wasn't available back then, and everything was analog, and we had camcorders, and instead of one iPhone, we had 50 billion different things to juggle to do 5 different tasks. But back then, you were born as a person, you had a physical identity, you didn't exist in this digital world. Today is very different. Everyone is born in a time where we're born with our digital identities. Okay? So now, also on top of that, human population in the past 300, 400, 500 years has gone from like 1 billion to 8 billion. We are like skyrocketing. We are skyrocketing as a population size. So the reason I say this is really important is because you all are born into a place where you have access to all this knowledge and YouTube and all your professions. Some of you are doing robotics, some of you might be doing healthcare, some of you might be doing cybersecurity. Whatever you're doing, this is the time where we're pioneering what the future is going to look like for not just the 8, but the 16 billion people that might not only be species on this planet, maybe might also be interplanetary when we reach Mars. And that might happen in our lifetimes, and you all might be the ones that help make that a reality for humanity as a whole. So for me, the big thing is just like harness this moment right now, because when I was in high school, I didn't think about the world like this. I didn't really pay attention in history class. I didn't have a philosophy class. Like I didn't think about any of these things, but over the time, it was these ideas of where we were and where we're going that helped me understand what I want to provide to other people in this world, and take advantage of this moment that we have, this finite amount of time to make an impact on everyone in the future.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What challenges, both technical and non-technical, did you encounter when spearheading Google's automatic security operations?
Yes. So the first funny thing is we always laugh because we it's people see it and they automatically think it says automatic. Some people think it's autonomous, but the reality is it's this word called autonomic. Okay, and autonomic typically refers to like your nervous system. Like when you're breathing, it's involuntary. It's an autonomic component of your body. The theory, the very high level abstracted theory was the day that security teams are a part of companies and you don't have to worry about them because they exist and they can protect and you trust them, now they've become an involuntary part of a company's organization, right? So technical challenges, I would say the biggest problem that you're going to encounter in the workforce, we get into work and we always feel we have this imposter syndrome. Like maybe, like there's so many people that are smarter than us and, we're not ready for the prime time and yada, yada, yada. But as you start to get through your first couple of years in the workforce and you start to go from contributing to creating, you're going to start to work on projects that you start to create. And then you start to realize that, hey, like I shouldn't have been afraid to challenge the way things were done and come up with ideas on how to solve problems. That's just kind of the imposter syndrome in me that's preventing me from feeling like I can go and do something that not everyone is practicing. And the reason it's really important to think this way is early on, you're going to get to this place where you're going to feel like you hit a plateau. And if you break that plateau, you broke it because you started to look at the way things were done, right? And you said, you know what, like I may have better ideas. And maybe some of them are going to be bad. Maybe 90% of them are going to be bad. But when you bring these ideas into the world, you start to meet people. And the more and more and more people you meet, you start to manifest, your solution. You start to learn more about the problem space you're solving. You start to dive into some of these really technical challenges and complexities that you didn't think about because all you started was with an idea. And now that you've met, 50 other people and talked to 50 other people about it, you start to learn about all the fine details. So, as you start to build ideas and you start to bring them into this world, even in high school, right? If you have ideas for your classroom, if you have ideas for your curriculum, don't be afraid to challenge anything. The easiest way to learn is to help others, is to teach others, and to bring bad ideas to the table and hit them with the hammer until they're good enough. So yeah, I know I didn't answer your question about the technical stuff because it's going to be too boring for this audience.
But of course, as you're working on your projects, I'm sure you have to learn some new things, of course, on the journey as issues arise. So how do you prioritize and choose what you want to learn? Where do you learn these? Where do you learn things as you're going through your career?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so little known fact, I wrote this book. It's called the Professional Cloud Architect. This happened out of the blue. I'll tell a story about that later. But I got 14 certifications like earlier on in my career. I would just be like, look, these certifications, it takes me 7 days to read a book. There's 12 chapters. I can get it. I can knock it out. Hopefully I can learn something from it. And if not, that's okay. At least I'll get the certification. There's a couple of different ways of learning when you're in tech, whether you're a software engineer or whether you're cybersecurity or whatever. One is learning by pursuing like what I call theoretical knowledge. So like certifications are theoretical knowledge. You're not actually hands-on keyboard. You're not coding. You're not learning. You're not typing Python scripts. Like you're just kind of learning about these different topics, concepts, so on and so forth. So one part, you find opportunities to build theoretical knowledge outside of work, okay? And in high school, it's kind of the inverse. In high school, what you're doing mostly is learning theoretical knowledge in high school, but you're not applying it to real world problems, right? In high school, you're doing all the theoretical knowledge, but then like, let's say you want to become a good software engineer right out of high school, you're probably going to become a good software engineer because you're working on some side project outside of school and you're actually hands-on keyboard and learning things. When you get out of high school, it's kind of like the inverse. You get into a job. Once you get out of college, you get into a job and you're 40 hours a week you're doing, right? And you're doing, and then you're trying to find time to also learn. But it's really important for you to consider that when you're in your 20s, and even when you're, I guess 14 to 18, right? When you're going through this time, every hour that you invest in yourself will pay you dividends exponentially in the future. And you don't think about that because a lot of times, like we're so busy, or we're so in the moment, we're having fun, but it just takes 1 hour of investing in yourself, 1 hour of being curious enough to go and YouTube some things. You don't need to go and dive in and start coding, on Code Labs or Team Treehouse or anything. Just watch a podcast, listen to a podcast, watch a YouTube video. Just bring that curiosity out of you for an hour a day. And everything you learn, even if it's not in software engineering, even if it's not in cybersecurity, it could be in entrepreneurship. It could be in a whole different field. It could just be about humanity and life and helping others. All these things will compound over the course of years, and you're going to thank yourself for saying, I just took 30 minutes or an hour out of my day to invest in myself. And maybe one day that investment is going to have a much bigger payout than, if I didn't.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you talk about exponential growth for like how much effort you put in and how much you receive out of that effort.
Say that again, you cut off a bit.
No, so I was just saying like that's really interesting how you talk about how the effort you put in right now to learn things is like exponentially benefits how much you get out of that learning. So how do you prioritize, like, if let's say multiple issues arise, like wherever you work in cybersecurity, let's say like multiple issues arise at the same time. how do you prioritize like what issues to take care of first?
That's a good one. So prioritization is actually really important, and it's awesome that you're learning this now because I wish people were teaching me this in school, but I also didn't go to AHS in Fremont where everyone is probably some way, shape, or form surrounded by tech. So prioritization is actually a really important skill. Like, how many hours do we have in a day, right? So when I was in high school, I used to sleep, 10 hours a day, or I'd play a lot of video games. How many hours do we have in a day? By the way, I want to tell you guys about video games. We'll get to that in a bit and why they were important for me. Prioritization is a really, really, really good skill. Okay. The reason why it's really good is because, over the course of time, you're going to find that people are going to want you to work on all sorts of things. And you're going to think about in college, well, I could be a doctor, or I could be a lawyer, or I could be this, or I could be that. Your brain is going to be scattered across all sorts of things, which is great. It's great to expose yourself to the world. And that's why it's so good to do research and watch YouTube and learn all about the different lives of people in the work. But at some point in time, you're going to realize that, hey, if I sleep 8 hours a day and I go to school 8 hours a day, that leaves me, and I'm, having dinner for one of those hours and lunch for one of those hours, that leaves me with, 6 hours of life, 6 hours of living. And by the way, I also want to invest in my health. So I want to maybe spend 1 hour, exercising, playing basketball with the friends, or, volleyball, whatever. You're going to realize that your time is very, very, very limited. Oh, and you also want to have fun. You're like, oh, I want to just play some games for an hour or two. Your time is very, very, very finite. And so when you get out of college, or even when you're in college, you start to prioritize things naturally. You start to prioritize like who you want to spend your time with. I want to spend my time with these friends more than the other friends, because these friends, we're getting along better. We have a shared vision of our futures, and so on and so forth, right? You start to prioritize time with your family, right? Maybe you spend more time with your parents and your siblings, and you don't, spend as much time elsewhere, right? Maybe you start to find different ways that you might have to prioritize time, or on your studies. But when you go into the workforce, priority is really important, because priorities are built at work, and in school is the same thing. I'll explain how it's done in school, because there is science to this. In work, it's done based off of, like, let's just say you work at a company like a Google. Google has this thing called objectives and key results. They call them OKRs. It's like a pyramid of, like, if I'm an intern, how does my work all funnel up to every single little part of Google until it gets to not just Sundar, the CEO, but all the board members and all of the people that are benefiting from Google's products. This is like the OKR culture, and this is how priorities are determined for the company, right? Now, it's really important, because when you start to work on a lot, you start to find your time is limited. And so you have to find ways that you can prioritize the things that are going to, first, they're going to help solve the problem at hand, right? So what's the problem in front of me? B is prioritizing the things that are going to help you in your career. When you're earlier in your career, you start to spend more time on yourself, and prioritizing your manager and making sure that they're successful as well. Then over the course of years, the priorities, as you start to go, shift away from prioritizing these, what's the problem, how do I solve problems for myself, how do I make my manager look good, to how can I spend more time on helping others around me and helping others grow in their careers, and mentoring others and investing in others. And then you start to build this network effect of people that you've supported, and that's how you start to prioritize, your work and how you go about solving problems. Oh, so video games. Wait, we can't leave that here. Come on, we've got a high school audience. We can't not talk about video games. So the thing I forgot to mention earlier when I talked about how I got into cybersecurity, it was actually, a lot of it was because of video games. So I spent a lot of time, little known fact, I was in a top 3 team in the world in this one game that was a competitive game to World of Warcraft. It was called Guild Wars, okay? And I was in one of the top 3 teams in the world on that team. I used to play a lot of this game called Counter-Strike, and I used to have teams and so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. But games were really important for me because I used to play games that would get me to think critically. So games like Roblox and Minecraft and these sandbox games are interesting because you get really creative. You start to build these creative skills in your mind. The other thing about games that I used to do was, back then I, would have to find ways to mod things in games. And so we were so curious. We used to play these games and we used to build new character skins and weapons and all sorts of things and run them on like local versions of the games that weren't online. And we were just so curious. We just wanted to build things like grappling hooks and all sorts of stuff. So I learned a lot of these like sort of software skills, engineering skills, and even security skills by, spending more time playing PC games than not. But now I'm, I wish I get time to do any sort of gaming. Now it's really hard to find time. So, and your parents, by the way, they're going to hate me for saying that.
Yeah, and I do believe that an audience member has a question too right now. Alejandro would like to ask him.
What do you see as the future of cybersecurity?
Great question. So I mentioned earlier, more and more and more companies like companies are signing these massive deals with companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google and these big cloud providers. And they're like, hey, we don't want to manage data centers. We want to use Google's massive infrastructure to go and build these new products, new innovations, and solve big problems, right? The future of cyber is going in one direction where more companies, as I mentioned earlier, more companies are building things that our lives are dependent on. And it's really important for us to make sure that we're protecting the safety of people, right? The other part of it is, there's a big effort going on today where I'll give you an example of how the world can be influenced by technology. And this is really important because cybersecurity, most people just think about the engineering side, but this is the other side of cybersecurity, which is important. In 2016, we talked about there's this big disinformation campaign, right? And a lot of people had no idea what disinformation campaign even meant. They're like, no one's tricking me into voting into someone else. But what was going on was basically Russians were basically building a bunch of bots. They were building bots and they were running big, large Facebook groups and Twitter accounts. And I'm talking like not 10 people, like thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of different, orchestrating all this different activity to flood our internet in America, to flood all of our Facebook groups and start to basically create fake news, right? Create all these different campaigns to subtly get people to just get riled up and be really polarized against who at the time was in power was Obama, right? And then the election was happening with Trump, so on and so forth. Now, this was really important moment of time for American history because the general population didn't realize that, so many of us were getting these targeted advertisements and being invited to these Facebook groups and people that are actually not actual people, but instead they're Russian bots that are writing comments to continue building more and more and more of like a snowball around the sentiment towards the Democratic Party at the time, right? And this triggered a lot of people to basically become polarized in America. So today, one of the big political problems we have is we've got a really far left and a really far right. And this is all thanks to people being able to manipulate technology to manipulate populations en masse. That's a big problem because that was just 2016. Now imagine what's next when the technology gets even better. They're able to, like let's take TikTok example. Like I know I use TikTok and everyone uses TikTok and there's a lot of beef on TikTok right now. And people are going to use it and I'm going to use it because people enjoy it, so on and so forth. But one of the things that, like, just imagine if, the government that is supporting, it's a Chinese product, it could have, hold on one second. Let me just open up this door. Let's take this TikTok example for a sec. So now imagine that all the millions and millions and millions of users, or maybe even billions, I don't know how many have, are basically in different countries. We're shifting the algorithms that people see. The algorithms that control the general news that people get targeted with, and the general things, a lot more pranks, send more pranks to the Americans because Americans love pranks. What does this do when people have this much control over how people see content, right? This is like a big problem we haven't figured out an answer for. And so this is where cybersecurity has another dimension. We have to figure out how to solve this problem of disinformation and authenticity, and helping bridge the gap between this big polarity we've created. So in one regard, it's protecting organizations that are building technologies for the world. In another regard, it's protecting our free decision making, access to unbiased information, so on and so forth. And then in the third regard, it's cyber warfare. It's a lot of people that are realizing that the future of warfare is all cyber, and more and more people, especially in the military, are getting access to are getting a lot more security training.
Got it. Yeah, and now moving away from cybersecurity, we just wanted to ask, could you talk a bit more about your inspiration behind creating... Sorry, I just caught there. Yeah, could you talk a bit more about your inspiration behind creating Afghan refugee-relief.org?
Yes, good question. Let me get the slide on so it's nice here. All right. All right, here we go. We're back. Afghan Refugee Relief was basically created. I mentioned, and by the way, my parents just came. It's so funny. I'm going to tell the story. They can't hear me, but my parents came to America in 1990. Okay, and when they came to America, I had two older brothers. They also came. They lived in a refugee camp. They left Afghanistan during the communist invasion. They lived in a refugee camp for 2-3 years. They had homes that were made out of mud that they had to live in, toilets that were made out of mud, and they didn't have anything. And they left their entire lives that they did have back in Afghanistan to try to come to America. And when they came here, I was born, 2 years after they got here, or a year after they got here. And I'm lucky to be born here, right? Like for me, life growing up was really difficult, right? Growing up on food stamps, growing up on, not having a family that was already existing here. And, our first computer was a free computer our uncle gave to us, way back in the day. I'm lucky to even still have had that life that I have, right? Because I could have also been born there. And if they never left, who knows? I would have been born and raised in a country that's also going through so much of a tumultuous time due to all the conflict that's happening in the region. Now, I look at everyone, back what was it, over a year ago when the Afghan refugee crisis happened. Now we have, again, a repeat of 1979, 1980, right? And we have all these Afghans who are trying to escape, the Taliban from taking over. They're trying to escape and survive so that their kids can have a future. And what happened was when they all started to come to America, everyone was scrambling to figure out how to help get them resettled. Now it's not everyone's for themselves. Now we can actually help. We can actually help them out. We can help get them food, shelter, get them basic financial aid, so on and so forth. And groups started popping up all over the world. Afghans, non-Afghans, Americans. I mean, the community support was unreal and incredible. So in Southern California, we had pockets of so many different people supporting, and we figured, hey, why don't we just come together and all support the same initiative? And we called it Afghan Refugee Relief. And our goal was to first focus on the immediate needs of all the Afghans that come to Southern California. Let's help them get resettled, because when you first get here, you got nothing. They're living in hotels. They don't have food. They don't have mattresses. They don't have anything. They don't have homes. They don't have cars. So the first effort was helping get them resettled. We had a warehouse. We had a storage team. We had all these various different committees on the ground that were doing so much work. So many people that have done way more work than I have, for this organization. And that was the focus, and it's shifted from that emergency at the time, which was 2,000 families in Southern California and 50,000 all over America. It's shifted from immediate resettlement now to now finding ways to help assimilate and help them get adjusted to the American system. Because if we leave these families behind and we don't properly educate them and coach them through American norms and culture, and we leave them in the dark, they're not going to have the ability. They're going to be in a position that was just as difficult as mine was. And I'm one of the very, very, very lucky few people to be able to get here in my life. And that's thanks to, my family and the people around me. So that was a bit about the inspiration behind why ARR exists and where we're headed.
Understood. And also, I guess a bit unrelated here, but for the high school audience that we have, what advice would you give to a high schooler interested in the field of computer science?
Okay, ComSci, very, very good field to be in. If you're in ComSci, don't leave it. If you have to leave it by force, I understand. It's really difficult. But if you don't, trust me, ComSci is one of the best places. I'm a cybersecurity guy, but I will tell you, ComSci is one of the best places you can be in, because the ComSci skills, they're they're transferable to any field, right? You can build in any field. ComSci also gives you the tools you need to basically be an entrepreneur, right? If you want to build your own company, you'll figure out how to, coding and early product development is one of the biggest challenges that most co-founders have. I would say don't just focus on the code itself. Coding is good, but you have to understand why you're doing things, right? It's very easy to get caught up and just lost in the class and what you got to do for your homework, and I got to build this function that creates a train that goes across the screen. That was one of my projects early on. But focus on the actual art itself and the practice. And this is why YouTube and podcasts and these things are important, because you start to learn beyond. There's the code, there's the theory, about how different engineering languages have evolved, and then there's the impact. You always have to make sure you're tying your work in to something that's going to be really impactful in your life. Because humans, we're, especially in your school, AHS, Fremont, humans are very much impact-driven folks. We love to have purpose. We all want to have purpose. We all want to seek purpose, and we all need to help each other find purpose. And so if you're just coding away, it's going to be really hard for you to be interested in it. But if you're finding the purpose of your career, which, by the way, if you look at anything in the world today, software engineering is needed for virtually every single job, every single industry, every single problem that needs to be solved. So tie your work in with a purpose. Spend some time watching some podcasts and YouTube videos, so on and so forth, and find some friends that are also in the same space. Make friends, find mentors. There's so many people that would be more than happy to mentor you, and all it takes is you just ask. Don't be afraid to ever ask. Don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn. Set up a LinkedIn and set up a Twitter. Okay, two things I'll tell you. Set up a LinkedIn, set up a Twitter, so that you can go and start connecting with people professionally. And then Twitter, because when you start to follow Twitter and software engineers, famous software engineers, or just people in the community, you start to see all these tweets that teach you tiny little bits of knowledge and allow you to also reach out and tweet these people and ask more questions. So just ask, do those things, and I promise you're gonna have a way better career than me or anyone else on this stage if you just focus on that. And that's the advice I got for you.
It's interesting how you emphasize that. Sorry, it's interesting how you emphasize that it's important to tie in computer science with the broader picture. So, following that, in a more general context, how can high schoolers make the best out of their high school experience?
Good question. Okay. Let me think back to high school for me, right? There's classes I could have done much better at in high school. there's times at high school where I look back and I'm like, oh, I wish I paid attention more. You know, like I guess the big thing for me is it's okay to understand if your high school work for you, it may seem like it doesn't have a purpose. You're gonna have different classes you're gonna take, and you go, oh, why do I have to write poetry and poems? I guess it's easy to think about all these things and realize that it may not directly tie into what you want to do in your career. But the reason why learning just this broad skill set is really important is because some of the best software engineers, and not just forget about best software engineers, some of the best people in the world have a very wide exposure to all the various backgrounds that others may have. And when you have exposure to other backgrounds, it allows you to build empathy and to understand problems better with the way other people think about problems. And so when you're taking a poetry class or philosophy or math or this or that, you don't have to always say that, why does this not have anything to do with my CS degree? You can basically find that there's beauty in everyone's work. And when you start to get better in your career and grow through your career, all the people that you work with are not going to be only software engineers. You know, they're going to be program managers and executives and finance people and marketing people and all these people that have no idea what a single line of code looks like. But it's so important for you to build this ability to digest knowledge from various different forms of communication and different backgrounds so that you become a better communicator in your work. And if you today, like I told my little cousin, I think she's 12 years old. She just moved to California. And she's like brand new. She doesn't have any friends or anything. And I told her, I was like, look, if you just go out and you start to find opportunities to help others in school, like step up when you see people aren't feeling included. If you're standing around, people aren't included in a conversation, they're standing awkwardly, step up and be that person to bring them in. If you start to like basically build these curiosity skills, the interest in others, the interest in different things, and you start to apply them, it'll just come natural to you, and you're gonna be that person that helps inspire generations, you know, that are gonna come right after you. And yeah, that's it.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching our fireside chat with Mr. Ghanizada. Take care, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Cheers.